What's up, Dark Judges, Desperados, and dudes in dick-shaped helmets? This is Heavy Metal Kid from Cursed Earth Radio, and we're coming back at you with some Judge Dredd Helter Skelter strategy and tactics discussion. And today we're talking about the Nikolai Dante faction, which is the fourth and final faction in our little series that we did here on this channel. So if you haven't seen those, when you're done with this video, you can go watch those. So the Nikolai Dante faction, to me, plays something like a Slain Plus or Slain Light. By that I mean the Slain faction was very heavy on hand-to-hand combat and emphasized sort of lone wolf individual characters going off on their own and doing their thing. So if you liked that but wished there was just a little bit more in the way of ranged combat and cooperation between characters, this faction gives that to you. You can see they're still very hand-to-hand combat centric, except for they don't have as many cards that deal bash damage. Instead, it almost leans towards more cards dealing single damage than single cards dealing more damage. You also have two characters that grant you a ranged attack, one being Nikolai Dante, who has that powerful shotgun blast ability, which is 2 spaces away, and we've used that to great success here on Cursed Earth Radio. You'll also notice that this faction has a pretty solid set of defensive abilities. Everybody has something, and a lot of them benefit greatly from cover. Last but not least, you will notice that in the yellow column there, a couple characters have that rally ability, and especially for this faction, it doesn't seem to work as well for me or for those of us that have played it here, as does the rally ability with the Justice Department. There is one last thing, but we'll talk about that when we get to the character. Real quickly, again, when you start this game, you'll get your 10 cards, and you will have to decide whether or not you want to put all of your strategy towards placing your characters in prime spots, if you're going to try and go get the reality fragments, or are you going to try and determine where the reality fragments of your opponents go. For this faction, I would recommend placing characters, putting your emphasis on placing characters who have cover abilities in cover to start off with. Nikolai Dante faction all have the ability to move fairly quickly across the board. The lowest number of cards total for each character is 17, and this goes all the way up to 19, so they shouldn't have too much trouble getting all the way across the board. They're not as speedy as Slain, because with Slain you're only dealing with 4 characters, but with the Nikolai Dante faction, they all have some form of cover protection other than Nikolai Dante, because he's a dashing rogue and he doesn't need to hide in cover. But everybody else benefits greatly from cover, and even Nikolai Dante will still benefit from the 4 open cards that involve cover. So put them in cover. Certainly, always try to mess your opponent up by putting their reality fragments far apart or away from where you think their characters may be. But if you have to choose, put these guys in cover, because they will benefit from it greatly. Alright, we're going to take a look at each character here, and we're starting with Elena Kakarin. I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced, but that's how we're going to pronounce it today. And she is the fastest moving character that you have in your faction. She has 19 cards and a very healthy amount of hand-to-hand combat damage. She has 5 cards that are your standard single damage attack, and just for good measure, she has 1 bash attack that you can run across in there. She's also very adept at cover and deflection defensive capabilities, and so she is a good option if you're going after, if you're going after the reality fragments, because she can move fast and she can defend herself hand-to-hand, but she's also not a bad option if you want to chase some people down and just get some kills early in the game. She was sort of the MVP of the game that we played most recently, with someone being Nikolai Dante, as she just seemed like she was able to get off a number of attacks and almost overwhelm her opponents with cards, because if you notice, it's not so much focused on the large amounts of damage at once, it's putting down a card, and then your opponent burns a defensive card. You put down another one, and you can basically run your opponent out of cards with this faction. And we saw that quite a few times, and she was, to some degree, the MVP when it came to that. Next, we have Jenna Markov. There she is. And this character does not move as quickly, but she offers you that long-range attack. And by that I mean she has 4 sniper cards and 2 hand-to-hand combat. So she's sort of a jack-of-all-trades character. What she does offer, though, is that rally ability. So she actually has 4 rally cards in her deck, which would imply that she should be also used as a support character. One of the problems with this faction is that none of the characters really that need support, maybe from a long-range character like Jenna, none of the characters that need that are very well suited to have someone with them. Like a good example is Viktor Romanov, who has need of long-range support, but also has that fly ability, which is going to separate you from the person who you're trying to travel with. So with this character, I would say use her as like an all-around character, and that's fine, but I wouldn't rely too heavily on the rally ability or try to position her just so she can rally someone else, because you're just going to end up getting her shot in the process. So she's like a middle-range character. She's almost like the Judge Hershey, but less effective to me. Nikolai Dante is the poster boy for this faction, and it's a shame he didn't make his way onto the cover. I don't know why they left him off. They should have had a big Nikolai Dante on the back cover, just for good measure. But nevertheless, here he is, and just like in every other faction, he's the sort of figurehead, and so he is the character that has the most variability. He has 3 standard attacks, and then also 2 sniper shot and 3 shotgun attacks. He's the only character that does not have cover protection, but that's because he is too dashing to hide, I'm sure. And he does have 3 deflection cards. The other thing Nicolai Dante has is that rally ability, but he only has 2 cards of rally, so if you find them, use them if you can, but otherwise they might just be used as movement cards or cards used to pick up those reality fragments. Definitely don't base your strategy around that. He's just kind of a good all-around character, and he has no problem getting around the board either. But of all of these characters, he sort of gives you the most flexibility. Oh, and he has 4 hit points. Next, we have Lulu Romanoff, and she is your super-duper special character with this ability called Demons. And it's whenever you use any sort of hand-to-hand combat action, the bash or the regular attack, you can target an enemy in an adjacent space. So she almost has like a scaled-down version of the shotgun attack whenever she attacks. It's a good ability, and I think it certainly makes her a character worth trying to keep alive throughout the game, because she also has a total of 6 close combat cards, so it's not too bad. You're likely to come across those, and then you can remember that you have 3 open cards, which means she could potentially have 9 cards that will allow her to attack. She also has a really, really good cover ratio. She has 3 cover cards. The only person with more cover cards in... no, actually, she's the person with the most cover cards. Sorry. The only addition to that is that there are 4 open cover cards in the Nicolai Dante set, so she should be fairly safe in cover. And most of these characters, I would suggest starting them in cover. Other than maybe Nicolai Dante, you can start him on the board first, kind of hide out with everyone else, and then reveal them in cover for that added protection. And she's one of your better characters just because of that ability. You can get close enough to people, like if you're going against Slain, you're kind of in a tough spot with this team because they really rely on hand-to-hand, and you want to keep Slain away, so at least you can hit Slain before he gets to her completely. Last but not least is Viktor Romanov, this guy over here on the end, and he has, you can see the green column all the way over to the right top right, he has 5 cards that allow him that flight ability. And that's okay, but it only really comes into play on one side of the map. So definitely don't base your entire strategy around his flight ability. Just know that it's there and don't forget to use it. For the most part, we found ourselves just kind of using him like any other character, and the flight didn't really come into play, but it's there if you need it. He also only has standard melee attacks. He has 5 of those and no ranged attacks, and his defensive abilities aren't that great either. He has a defensive cover ability. I feel like his stats are a little bit low to make up for that ability to fly, but I can certainly tell you in playing this faction, if I had the option to get rid of that fly ability and add something else offensively, I certainly would, or even defensively. So he's not one of your best either, but that is his ability and what he does. So that's pretty much it for each character. This faction doesn't have as much personality in the cards as some of the other factions. I think I'm less familiar with Nikolai Dante, so it also took me a while to figure out exactly how this faction was supposed to be played. When it comes to the Justice Department, Slain, and the Strontium Dog factions, I'm very familiar with most of those, and they play as you would expect them to. But with Nikolai Dante, it was a little bit harder to determine, and we just sort of look at them as like a Slain plus. Slain for people that like a little less straightforward hacking and slashing. So in terms of going against other factions, I will say that the Nikolai Dante faction won in a 4-player setting 3 games in a row, and so that says a lot for how well this team can do if somebody plays them and really gets that strategy down. If you're going against Slain, it's really going to be a rough day for you. That's your ultimate enemy there, because you're going to be forced into hand-to-hand combat with Slain, and Slain is just a little bit more on the sort of more powerful side, so you better have enough cards ready to deflect and block those attacks. But actually, if you look again, you should be pretty well prepared for that, because a basic fist blocks a bash, so just make sure if you're going against Slain that you hang on to some of those melee attacks for defensive measures. Normally against Slain you would want to stay away and shoot, so use your characters with long range attacks as much as you can to keep Slain away from you, and try to battle using that ranged attack. If you're going against the Strontium Dog faction, you can sort of afford to pursue them a little bit and hunt them down. You can use your speed to get across the board and stop them from getting all of the reality fragments, because the 2 factions are actually pretty well matched in terms of movement speed and their abilities to get across the board. So don't be too intimidated by that, and as always, if you can kill the Gronk, there's an easy point for you, and the Gronk is not hard to kill because he almost goes as a just sort of a side kick character that people don't generally put emphasis on. Finally, your tactics versus the Justice Department is going to be to get up close to them and try to attack them and take out some of the characters, because there's too much ranged combat with that faction for you to just go after reality fragments or whatever. It's not even a bad idea to keep some of your characters back, especially when you're playing a team that has more long-range attack than you, because if your characters aren't on the board, then they don't have anything to shoot at, and you can wait till they come closer to you and then sort of get the jump on them. So that is the Nikolai Dante faction. I think, unfortunately, because Nikolai Dante is a lesser-known property in the 2080 universe, a lot of people will not try out the Nikolai Dante faction. And we even joked when we got this game that it was like, oh, we're going to argue over who has to be Nikolai Dante. But what ended up happening was one of our players started playing them and actually really liked the way that the faction played, and sort of got the idea that he wanted to start looking into Nikolai Dante. And I think that's what's great about this game in general, is that for board gamers, it's showing people a tiny glimpse into sort of these worlds of 2000 AD. And if you have not looked into 2000 AD magazine or Judge Dredd magazine, I would certainly encourage you to do so. So hopefully this has been helpful. I would love to hear in the comments success that you've had playing the Nicolai Dante or any of these other factions, and we will keep bringing content for this game. We're going to put some live playthroughs, or not live, but some playthroughs, and 2-player, 3-player, 4-player games, just to sort of discuss tactics in a sort of live gaming setting. So all right, that's all we got. Thanks for checking us out. We don't really care if you like or watch or subscribe or any of that stuff, but share 2000 AD with somebody that you know, so that we can help spread the word of Dread to the Dreadless. Have a good one.